My name is Olivia, and I am 33 years old. At my sister's engagement dinner, my mother laughed and told the groom's affluent family that I was just a charity case living off handouts. My father chimed in to say they had stopped financially supporting me years ago, so I could finally learn to stand on my own 2 feet. The entire private dining room chuckled politely, while my sister smirked behind her crystal wine glass. I just sat there in silence, taking a slow sip of my water. What none of them realized was that I was the one paying for the $40,000 dinner they were currently eating, and I had also bought the 3-carat diamond ring sitting on my sister's finger. I never expected my own parents to use me as a punchline to impress my future in-laws. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who completely underestimated your worth. Trust me, you will want to hear how this elegant evening turned into the ultimate lesson in karma. The evening started at one of the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in downtown Atlanta. The private dining room was bathed in warm light from a massive crystal chandelier. My sister Savannah, who is 28 years old, was the golden child of our family. She sat at the head of the table next to her fiancé, Jamal. Jamal is a 30-year-old orthopedic surgeon, and his family is part of the city's intellectual elite. His mother, Josephine, is a retired federal judge, and his father is a prominent university dean. They exuded a quiet, undeniable grace. My parents, Richard and Caroline, were desperate to prove they belonged in the same tax bracket. Our family dynamic had always been incredibly clear. Savannah was the beautiful, successful lifestyle vlogger who could do no wrong. I was the quiet, invisible older sister who drove a beat-up Toyota Prius and wore practical, unbranded clothes. My parents assumed I was barely scraping by in some entry-level office job. They had no idea that I actually owned and operated a massive private equity firm managing hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate. I kept my wealth entirely hidden from them because I knew exactly how greedy they could be. As the waiters cleared our gourmet appetizers, my mother decided it was the perfect time to elevate Savannah by tearing me down. Caroline leaned across the long mahogany table toward Josephine, her voice artificially sweet and uncomfortably loud. "We are just so incredibly proud of Savannah," my mother announced, waving her hand toward my sister with a bright manufactured smile. "She is so driven, making a 6-figure income with her social media brand. It is such a massive relief as parents to see one of your children succeed so brilliantly." Josephine offered a polite, measured smile. "Savannah certainly seems passionate about her work. And what about you, Olivia? Jamal mentioned you work in finance." Before I could even open my mouth to answer the judge, my father Richard cut me off with a loud, dismissive scoff. "Oh, Olivia just shuffles papers around in a tiny cubicle somewhere," my father said, waving his heavy silver fork in the air, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "We honestly worry about her future all the time. She has always struggled to keep up with her peers. We had to cut off her financial aid a few years ago. We told her you cannot live off handouts from your parents forever. It is tough love, but she needed to learn absolute independence." My mother let out a theatrical sigh, placing a hand over her heart to feign concern. "It is true. We love her, of course, but she is essentially the family charity case. We are just glad we could bring her along tonight to experience a real luxury meal for once." The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. Jamal shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at Savannah, who was busy admiring her reflection in her butter knife, ignoring the disrespect. Josephine darted her sharp eyes from my mother to me. The retired judge smelled the toxicity but remained perfectly composed. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not try to defend myself against their pathetic lies. I simply took a slow sip of water and looked directly into my mother's eyes. I let the silence stretch, allowing the sheer embarrassment of her cruelty to hang in the air for everyone to witness. They truly had no idea about what was coming. The heavy silence in the private dining room was suddenly broken by the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against crystal. Jamal pushed his chair back and stood up at the head of the table. He was a tall man with a commanding presence sharpened by years of navigating high-pressure surgical rooms. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and looked down at my sister. Savannah beamed up at him, her eyes shining with fake adoration. She was clearly expecting him to deliver a glowing romantic tribute to their love story. My mother immediately reached for her phone to record the moment, whispering loudly to my father that they absolutely needed this footage for Savannah's social media followers. But Jamal did not look at the camera. He did not raise his glass to my sister. Instead, he turned his gaze directly toward my parents. His expression was completely unreadable, stripped of the polite warmth he had shown them all evening. Richard, Caroline. Jamal began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the room. I want to thank you both for your candor tonight. It is always refreshing to hear parents speak so openly about their core values, especially regarding financial independence and the severe danger of living off handouts. My parents puffed out their chests, completely mistaking his coldness for agreement. My father nodded vigorously, taking a large gulp of his expensive scotch. Exactly, Jamal, it is. About building character, my father declared with a smug grin. Jamal did not smile. He rested his hands on the edge of the table and leaned forward slightly. I completely agree, Jamal said smoothly. And because my family values honesty above absolutely everything else, I feel it is only right to set the record straight before we proceed with any celebrations tonight. Josephine, Jamal's mother, sat perfectly still, her eyes locked onto her son with an expression of intense focus. She knew him well enough to recognize the steel in his voice. Savannah's smile began to falter. Jamal, baby, what are you doing? She whispered, reaching out to tug at his sleeve. He gently but firmly pulled his arm away. You see, Richard? Jamal continued, ignoring my sister entirely. I was quite surprised to hear you speak so harshly about Olivia needing charity, especially considering the fact that Olivia is the only reason any of us are sitting in this Michelin-starred restaurant right now. My mother let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that sounded like scraping metal. Oh, Jamal, please, she stammered, waving her hand. Do not let Olivia's little finance job fool you. She could never afford a place like this on her own. Jamal pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from his inner jacket pocket and dropped it onto the center of the table. It was the restaurant's final receipt. Actually, Caroline, she can. Jamal stated, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. I spoke with the maitre d' before we sat down because I intended to treat everyone tonight. But I was informed that the bill had already been settled in full. A $40,000 tab prepaid on a black card belonging to Olivia. The color instantly drained from my mother's face. My father choked on his scotch, coughing violently into his linen napkin. The entire table stared at the receipt sitting under the chandelier light. But Jamal was not finished. He turned to look down at Savannah, who was now staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. And since we are on the topic of financial independence, Jamal said, his tone dropping an octave, I think it is time your parents knew the truth about the ring on your finger. Savannah gasped and quickly covered her left hand, but it was too late. When Savannah and I went ring shopping, Jamal explained I offered to buy a reasonably priced band. But Savannah insisted on the 3-carat flawless diamond. She told me she paid the massive difference herself using her brand deal money. But last week I accidentally saw the email receipt open on her laptop screen. Savannah did not pay for it, Olivia did. Olivia bought her own sister's engagement ring so Savannah could pretend to be wealthy on the internet. A suffocating silence slammed into the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Josephine slowly picked up her wineglass, her sharp eyes darting over to me with newfound respect. My mother looked like she was going to faint, staring at the diamond on Savannah's trembling hand. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, totally unable to formulate any excuse. I sat completely still, holding my mother's horrified gaze. Jamal slowly adjusted his rigid stance. I refuse to build a marriage on a foundation of cheap lies, he said quietly. Before Jamal could add another word, my father abruptly pushed his chair back. The legs scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. He marched around the table, his face flushed a dark, angry red, and grabbed my upper arm with a grip that bruised. "We are stepping into the private lounge next door right now," my father hissed through clenched teeth. "Caroline, bring Savannah. We need to handle this family matter privately." He practically dragged me out of the main dining room away from the shocked stares of Jamal and his parents. We crossed a hallway and burst into a VIP antechamber. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, the illusion of our perfect family shattered completely. Savannah let out a piercing sob. She threw her designer clutch across the room where it smacked loudly against a velvet sofa. "You ruined absolutely everything," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. "You could not just let me have one special night. You always have to make everything about you." My mother rushed to Savannah's side, wrapping her arms around her golden child and glaring at me as if I had just committed murder. Savannah was 28, but whenever she faced inconvenience, she regressed into a toddler. For years, she had been maxing out credit cards to fund her glamorous internet lifestyle, buying imported handbags, and booking first-class flights she could never afford. My parents always bailed her out, covering her massive debts, while telling friends how successful she was. Meanwhile, I was the designated scapegoat. If I needed a loan for college textbooks, I was given a lecture on fiscal responsibility. If Savannah needed $10,000 for a wellness retreat, it was considered a necessary investment. "How did you do it, Olivia?" My mother snapped, her voice trembling with intense rage. "Whose credit card did you steal to pull this sick stunt? You work in a tiny cubicle. There is no way you legally paid for that dinner or that diamond ring. Explain yourself before I call the police." I gently pried my father's heavy hand off my arm and took a deliberate step back, smoothing the front of my dress. "I did not steal anything," I replied calmly. "It is my money. I earned it, and I chose to pay because I knew Savannah was drowning in severe debt, and Jamal deserved to know the truth." Savannah let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "Your money? Please. You probably found some ancient, desperate sugar daddy to fund this entire charade. You definitely slept with a rich old man just to humiliate me in front of my future husband. You are so pathetic. You are so violently jealous of me that you would sink to being a high-priced escort just to steal my spotlight." She stomped her foot, tears streaming down her contoured face. "Jamal is an incredible doctor. His family is literal royalty in this city. Do you have any idea how hard I worked to secure this engagement? And you just destroyed it all because you are miserable and alone?" I stared at her genuinely, amazed by her vast delusion. "Secure this engagement? You talk about him like he is a business acquisition," I said softly. "I paid because the jeweler was about to decline your payment. I was standing right next to you when your 3 credit cards bounced. I stepped in so you would not be deeply humiliated in the store, and you promised you would tell Jamal the truth. Instead, you lied to his face and took the credit." My father stepped directly between us, his chest puffed out aggressively. "That is enough," he roared, his voice echoing in the small room. "I do not care how you got the money. Maybe you took out a predatory loan, or maybe you are doing something entirely illegal. What I care about is that you sabotaged your sister. Savannah is building an empire. She needs to project an image of endless success. You have nothing going on in your pathetic life, so you decided to drag her down to your miserable level." He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my chest. "You are going to march right back out there, and you are going to tell Jamal that you lied. You will tell him that you were jealous that you stole Savannah's receipt and that she paid for everything herself. If you do not fix this right now, I swear to you, Olivia, there will be severe consequences for your actions." My mother nodded vigorously, stroking Savannah's hair. "You owe her this much. You have always been a dark cloud hanging over this family. For once in your life, do the right thing and protect your sister today." I looked at my parents, feeling a sudden wave of absolute disgust replace any lingering sadness. "I am not going out there to lie to Jamal," I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. I am done covering up for Savannah's financial disasters. My father's face contorted into an ugly sneer. Fine, he spat out, stepping so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. If you refuse to fix this, consider yourself completely cut off. Tomorrow morning, I am calling my attorney to remove your name from the family trust. You will not see a single penny of the generational wealth I have built. Everything will go directly to Savannah. You will be left with absolutely nothing, Olivia. Just your pathetic cubicle job and your miserable life. He crossed his arms, clearly expecting me to fall to my knees and beg for his forgiveness. Instead, a short, humorless laugh escaped my lips. My mother gasped in dramatic horror at my reaction. "Are you actually laughing?" Caroline shrieked, her face turning pale. "Your father is threatening to disinherit you, and you think this is funny. You are completely unhinged." I slowly shook my head, locking eyes with my father. "I am laughing, because you cannot disinherit someone from a bank account that has a zero balance, Richard." My father's confident posture instantly collapsed, his shoulders dropping as his eyes darted nervously toward my mother. Caroline looked confused, glancing between the two of us. "What is she talking about?" my mother asked, her voice faltering. I took a step forward, forcing my father to step back. "The famous family trust," I said clearly. "The massive fortune you use to control everyone around you. Let us tell Caroline and Savannah the truth about where all that money actually went." My father held up his hands, his face suddenly slick with cold sweat. "Olivia, shut your mouth right now," he hissed frantically. But I was entirely done keeping his dark secrets. 5 years ago, I announced to the room my father was slapped with a massive corporate harassment lawsuit by two of his former female employees. To avoid going to federal prison and facing total public humiliation, he needed $500,000 for an out-of-court settlement. So he quietly drained the entire family trust. Every single dollar of our supposed generational wealth was handed over to keep him out of a jail cell. Savannah gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. My mother stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. "You lied to me," my mother whispered, staring at my father in absolute horror. "You told me that money was tied up in long-term overseas investments. I did not let my father speak." "It gets worse," I continued relentlessly. "Even after he emptied the trust, he was still $60,000 short on his legal fees. He came to my tiny apartment crying, begging me to help him. I dropped out of my master's degree program. I worked 3 grueling jobs. I bartended at night, did freelance data processing on weekends, and tutored college students during the day. I sacrificed 2 years of my life to pay off his hidden debts so the bank would not foreclose on this family's home. And what did you do, Richard? You took out a new credit card and sent Savannah on a luxury vacation to Europe so she would not get suspicious. You threw my future into the garbage to protect your own pride, and you have the nerve to call me a charity case." I stared at him, watching the arrogant patriarch shrink into a pathetic shell. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the VIP lounge creaked open. We all froze and turned around. Josephine stood in the doorway, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes sharp and calculating. The retired federal judge had followed us from the dining room and had clearly heard every single word of my confession. My father let out a weak, pathetic groan. Josephine stepped into the room, smoothly closing the door behind her. She did not look angry. She looked incredibly dangerous. "Well," Josephine said, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "As a former judge, I have presided over hundreds of fraud and harassment cases. I must admit, Richard hiding a major legal settlement from your spouse while extorting your oldest daughter is quite a fascinating display of character." She calmly pulled out a small leather notebook. Josephine looked directly at me, offering a subtle approving nod before turning her icy gaze back to my terrified parents. "I think my son and I need to have a very serious conversation about his future with this family," she said quietly, writing something down. "Because we simply do not merge assets with such liabilities." The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Josephine, leaving my parents and sisters suffocating in their exposed lies. I did not wait for my father to formulate another pathetic excuse or for my mother to start her theatrical weeping. I simply picked up my purse and walked out of the VIP room without looking back. I drove straight home to my luxury penthouse in peaceful silence. However, I knew my toxic family too well. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always attack. The next morning, I woke up at 6. The moment I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the screen illuminated with a barrage of notifications. There were over 80 missed calls and hundreds of unread text messages. I sat up against my headboard and unlocked the screen. These were not apologies from my parents. They were vicious attacks from my extended family. The flying monkeys had been officially deployed. My Aunt Brenda sent a paragraph calling me a jealous monster who hated seeing others happy. My cousin Matthew texted that I was a massive disappointment to the bloodline. My phone buzzed again with a message from my Uncle Greg demanding I publicly apologize for lying about paying for the restaurant bill. Clearly, my parents and Savannah had spent the night spinning a wild narrative to protect their fragile egos. I did not reply to a single message. Instead, I opened social media to see exactly what kind of damage control my sister was attempting. At the top of my feed was a new video posted by Savannah to her 50,000 followers. The thumbnail showed her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, clutching a tissue with mascara dramatically smeared under her eyes. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. I tapped the screen and watched her perform. "Hey guys," Savannah said to the camera, her voice trembling. "I am making this video because I always promised to be authentic with you. Last night was supposed to be the most magical night of my life. I got engaged to the man of my dreams. But my older sister, who has always struggled with severe narcissistic tendencies, decided to ruin it." She paused dramatically and wiped a fake tear away. She showed up to our intimate family dinner completely uninvited. She has been struggling financially for years, and my parents had to recently cut her off because she refused to get her life together. So out of pure jealousy, she threw a massive tantrum, made up these horrible lies about my fiancé, and tried to claim she bought my engagement ring. It is just so heartbreaking when someone you love is so deeply sick and unhappy that they want to destroy your joy. The video continued with Savannah claiming that Jamal was just overwhelmed by my crazy behavior, but that their relationship was stronger than ever. She ended the video asking her followers to send positive energy during this painful family crisis. The comments were a disaster. Thousands of strangers were dragging my name through the mud. They were calling me a toxic narcissist, a broke loser, and a pathetic spinster. Savannah was soaking up the sympathy, replying to comments with heart emojis and expressing how brave she felt for speaking her truth. She was monetizing her own lies, using my character as the sacrificial lamb to boost her social media engagement. A younger, weaker version of me might have cried. I might have called my parents begging for them to tell the truth. I might have panicked and tried to defend myself in the comments. But at 33 years old, sitting in a luxury penthouse that I bought with cash, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculated sense of clarity. Savannah had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. I calmly screen-recorded the entire video before she could realize the legal implications of her actions and delete it. I took screenshots of her defamatory replies to the comments. Then I took screenshots of every single abusive text message sent by my extended family members. I compiled all the evidence into a neat, organized digital folder. I opened my email application and drafted a message to the senior partner at the corporate law firm that represented my private equity company. The subject line was simply defamation and harassment. I attached the folder and typed a brief message. "Please review the attached evidence. My family has decided to launch a public smear campaign. Prepare the necessary cease and desist orders, but hold them for now. Let them dig the hole a little deeper." I hit send, placed my phone face down on the nightstand, and got out of bed to brew a cup of expensive coffee. The trap was perfectly set for their destruction. While I was peacefully drinking my coffee and organizing my evidence, my parents were sitting in their mortgaged living room in a state of absolute panic. The revelation from the night before had completely shattered their carefully constructed reality. It was not just the embarrassment of being exposed in front of Jamal and his mother Josephine. It was the undeniable realization that their scapegoat daughter, the one they had mocked and dismissed for years, possessed a black card and had easily dropped $40,000 on a single dinner. The greed immediately began to fester in the mind of my father. He paced back and forth across the hardwood floor, frantically running the numbers. Savannah was sobbing on the expensive couch, clutching a stack of past-due invoices from her wedding planner. The luxury venue, the imported floral arrangements, and the custom wedding dress were all demanding their final payments. Savannah had maxed out her credit cards, and Richard had no cash left to bail her out. If they did not find a massive injection of funds within the week, the entire wedding would be canceled. Their fraudulent high society image would be destroyed forever, and they would become the absolute laughingstock of their community. Caroline watched her husband pace, her eyes narrowing as a dark, desperate idea began to form. She stood up and smoothed the fabric of her expensive designer blouse. "Richard," she said quietly, "if Olivia has that kind of money, she is obviously hiding it from us. She is unwell, and she has always been completely detached from this family, living in her own little world. Maybe she is not in her right mind at all." My father stopped pacing and looked directly at his wife. A slow, sinister smile spread across his face as he understood exactly what she was implying. They did not see my financial success as a reason to respect me. They saw it as an unprotected asset waiting to be aggressively claimed. Within an hour, my father was sitting in the dimly lit office of a notoriously aggressive family law attorney named Gregory Thorne. Gregory was widely known around the city for taking on cases that honest ethical lawyers absolutely refused to touch. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, steepling his fingers as my parents spun a vicious web of absolute lies. My father leaned forward, looking deeply concerned and acting like a devoted parent. "Our daughter, Olivia, is suffering from severe mental instability." Richard lied incredibly smoothly. "She is exhibiting highly erratic behavior, hoarding massive amounts of money, and making bizarre, aggressive claims against her younger sister. We are terrified that she is going to hurt herself or fall victim to dangerous financial scammers. We need to step in and protect her assets before she destroys her own life entirely." Gregory Thorne smiled a cold, calculating smile because he knew exactly what my parents were doing. He only cared about billing them for his exorbitant hourly rate. "What you are looking for is a legal conservatorship," Gregory explained clearly. "It is a terrifying legal mechanism where the court grants you full, unrestricted control over your daughter's personal and financial affairs. If we can convince a judge that she lacks the capacity to manage her own estate due to severe psychological distress, you will be granted immediate access to all her bank accounts, properties, and corporate investments. You will have total authority over how every single dollar of her money is spent. This power is ostensibly granted for her own care and the overall care of her family members." Savannah, who had excitedly tagged along to the legal meeting, perked up instantly. "So, if we get this conservatorship approved, we could legally use her money to pay for my expensive wedding?" Savannah asked eagerly. "Because technically keeping the family happy and stable is considered part of her psychological care, right?" Gregory nodded slowly and confirmed that as her legal guardians, her parents would indeed have broad discretion over her finances. My mother clapped her hands together in delight, completely ignoring the sheer monstrosity of what they were actively plotting against my freedom. They were planning to use the justice system to strip me of my human rights, steal my hard-earned wealth, and reduce me to a financial hostage just to fund a lavish party. My father pulled out his credit card, maxing out the last available limit to pay Gregory Thorne his hefty retainer fee. "Draw up the paperwork," my father ordered sternly. "I want the petition filed with the court by tomorrow morning. We will claim she had a violent psychotic break at the restaurant last night." Gregory began typing on his computer, the legal trap loudly snapping shut. They walked out of that office feeling incredibly powerful. While my parents walked out of that law office feeling incredibly powerful, I was miles away living a reality they could not possibly comprehend. Later that morning, I merged my beat-up Toyota Prius onto the busy Atlanta highway. My family always mocked this car. They thought I drove it because I was broke. Savannah constantly made fun of the faded paint. In truth, I drove it because it was reliable, fuel efficient, and I never felt the desperate need to perform fake wealth for strangers. I navigated toward the financial district, pulling up to the security gates of a glass skyscraper. The security guard immediately smiled and opened the private VIP entrance. I drove my old Prius down into the brightly lit underground garage and parked directly between a Bentley and a Porsche. My parking space was the oversized executive spot marked specifically for the chief executive officer. I grabbed my briefcase, walked to the private elevator, and scanned my biometric fingerprint on the security pad to access the penthouse level. The polished steel elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the breathtaking lobby of Onyx Capital. This was my hidden empire, a fortress built entirely without my family's knowledge. I founded the firm 7 years ago with the money I had painstakingly saved, traded, and invested after paying off my father's hidden legal debts. Today, Onyx Capital managed over $800 million in high-yield real estate acquisitions and private equity portfolios. As I walked down the sleek glass corridor, senior investment bankers in custom, tailored suits nodded respectfully in my direction. "Good morning, Miss Olivia." My executive assistant greeted me warmly, handing me a fresh double espresso and a thick stack of morning financial briefings. I thanked her and walked into my expansive corner office, which featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire downtown city skyline. I sat behind my black marble desk, took a sip of the espresso, and opened my secure laptop to begin reviewing a $50 million commercial property acquisition in Chicago. 10 minutes later, there was a sharp knock on my frosted glass door. My lead corporate attorney, Thomas, stepped into the room. Thomas was a brilliant, ruthless legal mind who expertly handled all my corporate litigation. However, this morning he looked unusually tense, his jaw clenched tight. He placed a heavy legal folder directly onto the center of my desk. "We have a very serious situation developing," Thomas said, taking a seat opposite me. "I just received an urgent legal notification from the county courthouse. Your parents, Richard and Caroline, have officially filed an emergency petition for a legal conservatorship over you. They retained Gregory Thorne, a notoriously dirty family law attorney, known for destroying lives. They are falsely claiming to the court that you recently suffered a severe psychotic break, that you are irrationally hoarding wealth, and that you completely lack the mental capacity to manage your own affairs. They are asking a presiding judge to grant them immediate control over your estate to ostensibly protect you from yourself." Thomas leaned forward, his expression dead serious. "Olivia, this is not a joke. Thorne knows exactly how to manipulate the court system. If a judge grants even a temporary emergency order based on their fabricated statements, your parents could instantly freeze your bank accounts and lock you out of Onyx Capital. We need to file an injunction immediately to block this petition before it reaches a hearing." I looked down at the official court documents. I saw my father's signature boldly scrawled at the bottom of the page, full of overwhelming arrogance and unchecked greed. Instead of panicking, I leaned back in my leather chair and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Thomas looked at me in confusion, clearly expecting me to be terrified. I closed the heavy folder and pushed it back across the marble desk. "Do not block it, Thomas," I said calmly. "Let them file it. Let them bring this circus straight to a judge." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "But why would you willingly risk opening the door to a conservatorship battle?" I smiled coldly, looking out at the city skyline below my window. "Because Thomas filing this specific legal petition forces a mandatory financial discovery phase. In order to legally prove they are financially responsible and fit to manage my vast wealth, my parents will be mandated to open their own private financial books to the court. They will have to expose their massive credit card debts, their foreclosed mortgages, and Savannah's unpaid wedding bills under the strict penalty of perjury. They think they are setting a trap for me, but they just handed us the right to completely destroy them." After After Thomas left my office to begin preparing our legal counterstrike, my private cell phone buzzed on the marble desk. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I normally let those go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. It was Jamal. His voice sounded strained, completely stripped of the confident warmth he usually carried. He asked if we could meet immediately in person, somewhere far away from my sister and her constant social media filming. I agreed and directed him to a quiet, independent coffee shop tucked away on a side street near the hospital where he worked. I arrived 15 minutes later. Jamal was already sitting in a dark leather booth in the back corner. He was still wearing his blue surgical scrubs, looking exhausted. He had a black coffee in front of him, untouched. When I slid into the booth across from him, he looked up and let out a heavy sigh. I did not even bother with small talk. I simply asked him what happened after I walked out of the VIP room last night. Jamal rubbed his temples. He told me that after his mother and I left Savannah, immediately threw another massive tantrum. She demanded that Jamal buy her a brand new car right then and there to make up for the severe emotional trauma I had supposedly caused her. Jamal said he looked at her crying on the floor and felt nothing but absolute disgust. He finally saw the real Savannah, the spoiled, entitled manipulator, hiding behind a curated internet persona. He realized he was engaged to a woman who only valued him as an endless ATM machine. But the situation had escalated far beyond Savannah's petty demands. Jamal leaned across the small wooden table, lowering his voice. "Your father cornered me this morning before my shift." Jamal explained, his eyes burning with quiet anger. Richard showed up at the hospital parking garage, holding a thick legal document. He demanded that I sign a contract right there on the hood of my car. It was a promissory note for $200,000. Richard called it a temporary family loan to cover the remaining vendor invoices for the wedding. He told me that since I was joining the family, it was my absolute duty to protect Savannah's public image and ensure the event was flawless. I stared at Jamal, completely amazed by my father's sheer audacity. "He tried to extort you in a hospital parking lot?" I asked flatly. Jamal nodded. "He told me that if I refused to sign the loan agreement, he would personally cancel the wedding today." Richard threatened to go to the local press and the country club board to claim I had physically abused Savannah, ruining my medical career and my family's spotless reputation. And to top it all off, Richard explicitly stated that they were keeping the 3-carat diamond ring as compensation for their wasted time, completely ignoring the fact that you were the one who paid for it. Jamal leaned back against the booth. He confessed that he no longer wanted to marry Savannah. The illusion was completely shattered. However, his family had already invested significant social capital into this union, and his mother Josephine had invited several high-profile federal judges to the wedding. He felt entirely trapped by my father's vicious blackmail and the looming threat of a public scandal. He did not care about the money as much as he cared about protecting his family name from my parents' toxic smear campaign. I listened carefully, taking a slow sip of my tea. My father was desperately trying to plug the holes in his sinking ship, completely unaware that he was just accelerating his own total destruction. I looked at Jamal and saw a genuinely good man who had been targeted by a family of professional parasites. "You are not going to sign that document," I told him firmly. "And you are definitely not going to marry my sister. Let Richard make all the threats he wants. He does not hold any real power." I then explained the conservatorship filing to Jamal. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he realized the true depths of my parents' depravity. They were willing to lock their own daughter in a legal cage just to steal her money. Jamal realized that my family was entirely radioactive. I leaned forward and told him that we needed to turn this extortion attempt back onto them. I told Jamal to tell my father that he needed 24 hours to review the loan documents before signing. We were going to use their own overwhelming greed to set a final, inescapable trap at the upcoming wedding rehearsal dinner. Jamal slowly nodded, a determined fire returning to his eyes. Just as Jamal slowly nodded, a determined fire returning to his eyes, the little bell above the coffee shop door chimed brightly. I looked up from my tea and saw Josephine walking gracefully toward our corner booth. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal blazer and carried herself with the undeniable quiet authority of a woman who had spent decades presiding over complex federal courtrooms. Jamal immediately stood up to pull out a leather chair for his mother. I had asked her to join us this morning, Jamal explained quietly as she sat down across from me. I hope you do not mind my intrusion, Olivia. I realized we need her brilliant legal perspective to navigate this absolute nightmare effectively. I did not mind her presence at all. In fact, looking directly into Josephine's sharp and highly intelligent eyes, I knew I had just gained the most powerful ally in the entire city. Josephine politely ordered a cup of black Earl Grey tea from a passing barista before turning her full, undivided attention to me. She folded her manicured hands neatly on the wooden table. I spent my entire morning making a few discreet phone calls to my former colleagues at the county courthouse. Josephine said, her voice remarkably smooth and commanding. I am fully aware of the emergency conservatorship petition your parents filed with Gregory Thorne. It is a completely baseless and deeply malicious legal filing. But what truly fascinated me the most was what I discovered when I casually looked into your professional background, Olivia. She offered me a rare, genuine smile of profound professional respect. A private equity empire built completely from scratch, successfully managing hundreds of millions in complex assets. You have played an incredibly brilliant game of chess against a toxic family of foolish checkers players. I deeply admire your immense discipline. It takes profound mental strength to endure their relentless emotional abuse while quietly building a massive financial fortress they could never penetrate. Thank you, Josephine, I replied honestly, feeling a strange and comforting warmth spreading in my chest. It was the very first time an older mother figure had ever validated my hard work instead of aggressively diminishing it. Josephine waved her hand dismissively to move the conversation forward. We do not need pleasantries right now. We need a flawless execution strategy. My son is absolutely not marrying into a twisted family of desperate extortionists. But we are also not going to let Richard and Caroline walk away unscathed after trying to brutally blackmail him and steal your private estate. They deeply insulted my family last night. I do not tolerate foolish insults, and I certainly do not tolerate reckless criminals. Jamal leaned forward over his cold coffee. Olivia wants me to intentionally delay signing the loan document until the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. She wants to set a public trap. Josephine's dark eyes gleamed with absolute strategic delight. That is excellent. The rehearsal dinner is being hosted at the Oak Creek Country Club. It is a highly public venue filled with their wealthy peers, influential country club board members, and my esteemed legal guests. Richard and Caroline have designed this entire event to boldly showcase their fake wealth and solidify their elevated social status among the city elite. I nodded in firm agreement. That is exactly why we must tear their illusion down in that specific room. The conservatorship petition legally forces a mandatory financial discovery phase. By tomorrow afternoon, my corporate attorneys will have legally obtained their full financial records. I want to project their hidden bankruptcy, their multiple foreclosures, and their massive credit card debts onto the wall for every single guest to clearly see. I want everyone to realize they are trying to declare me legally incompetent just so they can steal my hard-earned money to aggressively fund Savannah's extravagant lifestyle. Josephine took a slow, calculated sip of her hot tea. We will coordinate this perfectly. Jamal will bring the unsigned extortion contract to the dinner. When Richard inevitably corners him and tries to forcefully demand the signature, we will use that exact moment to completely turn the tables. I will personally review the financial documents your lawyers acquire tomorrow to ensure we do not violate any privacy laws that Thorne could potentially use against us in court. We will present the evidence as a legally necessary defense against their fraudulent conservatorship claims. It was a truly masterful plan. Josephine was not just helping me defend my assets, she was actively teaching me how to legally destroy my abusers without leaving a single loophole for Gregory Thorne to exploit. "Are you prepared for the massive fallout?" Olivia Josephine asked calmly. "They will be entirely ruined forever." "I am completely prepared," I said without hesitation. They dug their own grave. I left the coffee shop feeling an electric current of anticipation running through my veins. The pieces of my ultimate trap were moving flawlessly into place. As I stepped out into the bright Atlanta afternoon, my cell phone vibrated again in my purse. It was Thomas, my lead corporate attorney. He informed me that the emergency conservatorship petition had officially been logged by the county clerk. Thorne had pushed it through with terrifying speed, leveraging his shady connections within the local courthouse. A process server was already en route to my office to formally deliver the summons. I drove back to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Onyx Capital and took the private elevator directly up to the penthouse floor. By the time I walked into my corner office, a stern-looking man in a cheap gray suit was waiting in the lobby. He handed me a thick manila envelope and briskly walked away. I sat down at my black marble desk, sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener, and spread the documents out in front of me. The sheer volume of lies contained within those pages was staggering. My father had submitted a sworn affidavit claiming I suffered from violent delusions. My mother had attached a fabricated list of my supposedly erratic spending habits, completely omitting the fact that every single dollar they referenced was spent bailing out their golden child Savannah. Just as I finished reading the disgusting legal jargon, my phone screen lit up with a new text message. It was from Caroline. "Give us access to your bank accounts voluntarily," she wrote, her words dripping with a fake sickening sweetness. "If you just cooperate, we will tell Mr. Thorne to drop the court case immediately. We just want to help you, sweetie. You are clearly not well, and family needs to stick together." I stared at the text message, completely repulsed by her blatant attempt at psychological manipulation. She was trying to play the role of the concerned, loving mother while simultaneously holding a legal gun directly to my head. They genuinely believed I was weak enough to fold under the pressure of a court battle. They thought the threat of public humiliation would force me to hand over the keys to my financial empire. I did not type out a long, angry response. I did not try to reason with her or defend my sanity. I simply selected a single thumbs-up emoji and hit send. That tiny yellow digital image was the absolute perfect response. It gave them absolutely nothing to use against me, but it secretly signaled my total readiness for the impending war. I could almost picture my mother staring at her phone screen in the mortgaged living room, completely baffled and infuriated by my calm dismissal. I set the phone aside and immediately called Thomas into my office. We had less than 24 hours to compile the most devastating financial dossier this city had ever seen. Thomas arrived with 3 junior analysts carrying massive stacks of encrypted hard drives. The conservatorship filing gave us the absolute legal right to demand my parents' financial disclosures under the strict penalty of perjury. Thomas had already pulled their credit reports, their mortgage histories, and their outstanding tax liens. For the next 5 hours, we sat in my office and meticulously connected the dots of their monumental financial fraud. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had initially suspected. My parents were not just broke. They were drowning in massive debt. They had taken out a second mortgage on a house they barely owned. Their credit cards were maxed out with exorbitant interest rates, and they were 3 months behind on their luxury car lease payments. Savannah's wedding expenses alone had pushed them over the edge into absolute bankruptcy. I printed every single document on high-quality, legal-sized paper. I placed the bank statements showing Savannah's unpaid vendor invoices next to the foreclosure notices my father had hidden from his country club friends. I carefully organized the evidence into a thick black leather binder. This was not just a defense against a frivolous lawsuit. This was a highly weaponized summary of their entire pathetic existence. I closed the heavy binder and locked it inside my wall safe. The calm before the massive storm settled over my office. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. Tomorrow night, my family would walk into the Oak Creek Country Club, feeling incredibly arrogant, completely convinced they had finally cornered me into submission. They had no idea that I was walking into that exact same room, holding the absolute power to erase their entire social and financial identity forever. I grabbed my car keys, feeling a dark, satisfying smile spread across my face. Let the rehearsal dinner begin. The heavy oak doors of the Oak Creek Country Club stood open, flanked by pristine floral arrangements that my parents could not actually afford. I handed the keys of my Toyota Prius to the valet, ignoring his slightly judgmental glance. Inside the grand ballroom was a masterclass in complete financial delusion. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the 50 guests. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of expensive champagne. My mother, Caroline, was holding court near the towering stone fireplace. She was wearing a stunning custom-beaded designer gown that I knew for an absolute fact was purchased on a maxed-out credit card just 3 days ago. She looked like a wealthy matriarch playing the role of high society royalty with sickening enthusiasm. I stood quietly by the entrance, clutching my sleek black designer handbag, which discreetly concealed the digital tablet containing the devastating financial dossier. I watched carefully as Caroline zeroed in on Jamal's family. Josephine and Jamal's father were standing near the string quartet, looking incredibly elegant. Josephine wore a beautifully tailored emerald silk suit, projecting effortless sophistication. My mother glided over to them, a condescending smile plastered across her face. "Oh, Josephine," Caroline cooed loudly, ensuring the nearby country club members could hear every single word. "I am just so thrilled you could make it to our little club tonight. I know these environments can feel a bit overwhelming if you are not accustomed to this level of traditional exclusivity. But please do not feel intimidated. Just ask the catering staff if you need help figuring out the gourmet menu." My mother's tone was dripping with venomous, racially coded microaggressions. She was desperately trying to paint Jamal's highly educated, profoundly successful African-American family as outsiders who should feel incredibly grateful to be allowed into her precious country club space. Josephine did not flinch. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of anger. She simply took a slow sip of her sparkling water and looked at my mother with an expression of mild clinical pity. "Thank you for your deep concern," Caroline Josephine replied, her voice smooth and carrying a terrifyingly calm authority. "But there is absolutely no need to worry about us. I am actually quite familiar with this specific club. In fact, I sat on the board of directors here for 6 years before I stepped down to accept my federal judicial appointment. I was the one who drafted the updated bylaws allowing non-legacy members like Richard to finally purchase a membership." The blood instantly drained from my mother's heavily contoured face. Caroline's jaw tightened, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of Josephine's polite surgical strike. Several nearby guests, including the current club president, turned their heads and chuckled softly at my mother's profound public embarrassment. Josephine tilted her head slightly, offering a devastatingly polite smile. "I do hope you are enjoying the luxury amenities, Caroline. It is always so nice to see new members trying their absolute best to fit in." My mother swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She mumbled a hasty, incoherent excuse about needing to check on the catering staff and quickly scurried away toward the kitchen doors. I walked over to Josephine, completely unable to hide the amused smirk on my face. "That was absolutely brilliant," I whispered as I joined her side. Josephine kept her eyes straight ahead, watching my mother flee the interaction. "Real wealth is entirely silent, Olivia," Josephine murmured back to me, taking another sip of water. "Only massive suffocating debt feels the desperate need to scream for attention." We shared a brief knowing look. The trap was holding perfectly, and my mother had already made a massive fool of herself. Across the lavish room, I saw my anxious father pacing near the private mahogany bar. Richard was sweating profusely through his rented tuxedo. He was not mingling with the guests or enjoying the expensive champagne he had illegally financed. Instead, his dark eyes were locked entirely onto Jamal. I watched my father anxiously pull a thick folded legal document from his breast pocket. He tapped his expensive watch aggressively, signaling Jamal to step out into the secluded hallway away from the main party. Savannah was standing nearby, nervously biting her lip and avoiding Jamal's gaze. The desperate extortion attempt was finally about to begin. I tightened my grip on my black leather handbag and took a very long, deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I was entirely ready to boldly step right into that dimly lit hallway, confidently intercept that highly fraudulent loan contract from his trembling hands, and finally begin the highly anticipated, meticulous process of tearing their totally fake, carefully constructed world completely apart, piece by satisfying piece. I walked quietly out of the bustling main ballroom and stepped into the quiet, carpeted hallway leading toward the private restrooms. Just around the corner, I found my father Richard cornering Jamal. He had Jamal backed against the stone wall. The legal document was shoved into Jamal's chest. "Listen to me very carefully," Jamal, my father, hissed, his voice tight with aggressive desperation. "You are marrying my beautiful daughter tomorrow. You are marrying into my prestigious family. With that immense privilege comes certain unwritten financial responsibilities. The wedding planner needs a $200,000 wire transfer by midnight tonight, or the entire event is officially canceled. Savannah will be completely devastated, and I will personally make sure every single person in this city knows you were the one who broke her heart and backed out on your solemn financial commitments." Jamal stood his ground, his jaw clenched tightly. He looked down at the paper and then back up at my sweating father. "Richard, I am not signing a predatory loan agreement," Jamal said, his voice low and firm. "You are attempting to extort me for a wedding that you clearly cannot afford. This has absolutely nothing to do with my commitment to Savannah and everything to do with your profound financial mismanagement." My father's face turned a violent shade of purple. He jabbed his thick index finger hard against Jamal's chest. "Listen here, you arrogant punk," my father growled, leaning close. "You will sign this paper right now, or I will walk back into that ballroom and announce to my wealthy friends that you physically assaulted my daughter. I will ruin your pristine medical career before it even begins. You think your mother can protect you from a public scandal? You sign it or the wedding is completely dead, and I am keeping the diamond ring." That was my absolute cue. I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway, completely abandoning my silent observation. I walked briskly toward them, my high heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. My father turned his head, startled by the sudden noise, but before he could even register my presence, I reached out and snatched the thick contract right out of his trembling hands. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" my father shouted, lunging forward to grab the document back. I quickly stepped out of his reach, holding the paper up to the dim hallway light. I scanned the first page, pretending to be deeply interested in the legal jargon. "A $200,000 promissory note at an 8% interest rate," I read aloud, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Really, Richard? You are trying to act like a high-rolling mafia boss in a rented tuxedo. It is honestly pathetic. Give that back to me right now, Olivia," my father demanded, his hands balled into tight, aggressive fists. "You are completely out of your mind. This is exactly why we filed that court petition against you. You have absolutely no right to interfere in my private family business." I looked directly into his panicked eyes. "You are right," I said calmly. "I have no right to interfere. But as the person who actually paid for the engagement ring you are currently trying to steal, I think I get a vote." Without breaking eye contact with my father, I gripped the thick stack of papers with both hands and ripped the entire contract perfectly in half. I let the torn pages flutter down onto the marble floor like cheap, worthless confetti. My father let out a loud, guttural scream of pure, unfiltered rage. "You stupid, ungrateful brat!" he roared, his face contorting into an ugly mask of hatred. "You just destroyed Savannah's entire future." The loud shouting instantly attracted attention. The heavy ballroom doors swung violently open. Savannah and Caroline rushed out into the hallway, followed closely by several curious country club guests who had heard the massive commotion. Savannah took one look at the torn contracts scattered across the floor and let out a piercing, dramatic shriek. She ran over and dropped to her knees, frantically trying to piece the shredded paper back together. "What did you do?" Savannah screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a sick, jealous monster. You came here just to ruin my perfect life." She scrambled to her feet, her designer dress wrinkling in the process. She turned toward a nearby staff member who was watching the scene unfold in complete shock. "Security!" Savannah shrieked at the top of her lungs. "Call the country club security right now. I want this crazy woman physically thrown out immediately. She is violently attacking my family." Jamal stepped between us, shielding me as I held my handbag tightly. Jamal stepped between us, shielding me as I held my handbag tightly. He raised his hands, warning my father to back away. Richard was breathing heavily, but he hesitated when he saw the icy determination in Jamal's eyes. Savannah continued to scream for the country club security guards who were making their way down the hallway. "Sir, is there a problem here?" one guard asked, looking nervously between my furious father and my perfectly calm demeanor. My mother, Caroline, arrived right behind the guards, panting heavily. "She is trespassing!" Caroline shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is violently unstable and actively trying to ruin my daughter's rehearsal dinner. Escort her off the premises right this second." I gently placed my hand on Jamal's shoulder and stepped around him, completely ignoring my hysterical mother. "I am not trespassing," I said clearly, pulling my gold-embossed country club membership card from my handbag and holding it up for the guards to see. "I am a fully paying platinum member of this establishment, and I am making my way back to the main ballroom." The security guards looked at the elite card and took a step back, unwilling to forcefully remove a high-tier member. Instead of heading toward the exit doors, I turned on my heel and walked briskly back into the grand ballroom. The string quartet was still playing a soft romantic melody, and the wealthy guests were happily sipping their expensive champagne, completely unaware of the massive conflict that had just occurred in the hallway. I did not walk back to my assigned table. I walked directly toward the elevated audio-visual booth situated at the far end of the room. The young technician sitting behind the soundboard looked up in surprise as I confidently entered his designated workspace. "Excuse me, miss, you are not allowed back here," he started to say, but I simply handed him a crisp $100 bill and pointed to the main projection system. "I need to display a presentation for the bride and groom," I told him firmly. The technician happily took the cash and stepped aside, pointing to the main connection cable. I unzipped my designer handbag and pulled out the sleek digital tablet containing the devastating financial dossier my corporate attorneys had compiled. I plugged the connection cable directly into my device. With a few quick taps on the screen, I synced the tablet to the main ballroom system. First, I disabled the audio feed. The soft, romantic string quartet music was instantly cut off mid-note. The sudden jarring silence echoed loudly through the massive room, causing every single guest to stop talking and turn their attention toward the front of the ballroom. Next, I activated the main visual projector. The heavy mechanical gears hummed loudly above us, and a blindingly bright white light shot across the room. It illuminated the massive blank wall directly behind the lavish head table where Savannah was supposed to sit. The guests naturally expected to see a beautiful romantic slideshow featuring childhood photos of the bride and the groom. Instead, they were greeted by the stark, highly clinical interface of a massive financial spreadsheet. I picked up the main wireless microphone from the audio board and flipped the switch to the on position. The microphone let out a sharp feedback whine, making wealthy guests wince and cover their ears. My father, Richard, and my mother, Caroline, burst through the hallway doors just as the image came into perfect focus. They froze, completely paralyzed by absolute terror. Projected in massive, bold letters across the entire back wall were official bank logos, highly confidential account numbers, and undeniable legal foreclosure notices. Savannah stumbled into the ballroom right behind them, clutching the torn pieces of the extortion contract. She looked up at the wall and her jaw dropped in utter confusion. She did not understand what she was looking at, because she had never been forced to look at a real financial document. But the corporate executives and wealthy elite in the audience immediately recognized the severe legal documents glaring down at them. I stepped out of the audio-visual booth, holding the microphone tightly in my right hand. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by silent guests. My voice boomed clearly through the surround sound speakers, cutting through the heavy tension in the air. "Good evening, everyone," I said smoothly, looking directly at my deeply terrified parents. My parents recently filed a legal petition claiming I am mentally unfit to manage my own money. They claim they are financially responsible enough to take over my estate. So I thought tonight would be the perfect opportunity to transparently review their impressive financial portfolio with all of their very closest elite friends here. "Let us start by looking at my sister Savannah," I said, tapping the screen of my tablet. A giant high-resolution image of a red Porsche Macan flashed onto the wall alongside a highly detailed dealership invoice. Savannah loves to post videos of herself driving this exact luxury vehicle, telling her 50,000 followers that she bought it entirely with her own hard-earned brand deal money. But the dealership contract displayed behind me tells a very different story. It is not owned. It is a lease signed by our father, Richard. And according to the bold red letters from the financing department, that lease is currently 3 full months past due. The dealership has already issued a formal repossession order. Your luxury car is going to be towed away at any moment, Savannah. Savannah let out a choked gasp and covered her face with her hands. Several wealthy women sitting near the front of the room began to openly whisper to each other, casting judgmental glances at my sister. The illusion of her glamorous internet lifestyle was crumbling right in front of her future in-laws. Jamal stood firmly beside his mother, Josephine, watching the entire spectacle with a look of pure vindication. He finally saw the absolute truth about the woman he had almost married. I tapped the screen again, completely ignoring my sister's tears. "Now let us move on to the financial stability of the two people who are actively petitioning a judge to seize my private assets," I announced clearly. The slide changed to a massive pie chart accompanied by scanned copies of several platinum credit card statements. Richard and Caroline have spent the last decade portraying themselves as incredibly successful pillars of this community. They brag about their country club membership, their lavish vacations, and their designer wardrobes. However, the reality of their bank accounts is entirely horrifying. Right now, my parents are carrying exactly $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt. A loud collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. In high society circles, carrying that much high-interest revolving debt was considered incredibly vulgar and profoundly embarrassing. My mother, Caroline, turned a sickly shade of gray. She frantically looked around the room, making desperate eye contact with the country club president, but he simply looked away in disgust. I zoomed in on one specific line item from a recent statement. For example, I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the silent room. "That stunning custom beaded gown my mother is wearing right now. It is absolutely beautiful, Caroline. But you purchased it 3 days ago using a credit card with a 24% interest rate that has already exceeded its maximum limit. You do not even own the clothes on your own back, yet you firmly believe you have the right to legally declare me incompetent and steal my private wealth." My father, Richard, finally snapped. He aggressively shoved his way past a waiter, knocking a silver tray of champagne glasses onto the floor. The glass shattered violently, but nobody moved to clean it up. "Shut it off right now!" Richard roared, his face drenched in panic and sweat. "You are violating our privacy. This is completely illegal. You stole these documents. I am calling the police." I stood my ground in the center of the ballroom, completely unfazed by his aggressive outburst. "I did not steal anything, Richard," I replied smoothly, holding the microphone steady. "You filed a malicious legal conservatorship petition against me yesterday morning. By legally questioning my financial competency in a court of law, you automatically opened your own financial records to the mandatory discovery process. My corporate attorneys legally subpoenaed every single document you see on this wall. You handed me the exact weapon I am currently using to destroy your fake reputation." My mother let out a loud, pathetic wail and collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands. The entire room was staring at them with absolute contempt. The wealthy elite they had desperately tried to impress were now looking at them like they were a highly contagious disease. They were exposed as absolute frauds, desperately swimming in overwhelming debt, trying to exploit their own daughter just to maintain a pathetic social illusion. But I was not finished. The credit card debt and the leased car were just the appetizers. I had one final document to project onto that wall, and it was the ultimate death blow to their entire existence. I took a deep breath, looked directly at my sweating father, and tapped the digital screen one more time. "Let us talk about your severely depleted bank accounts and your entirely foreclosed family home," I stated boldly, watching him panic right here in this massive grand ballroom. Before I could even swipe my finger across the digital tablet to reveal the final devastating slide, my mother Caroline suddenly sprang from her chair. She pushed her way to the front of the room, placing herself directly between the massive projector screen and the shocked wealthy country club guests. "Do not listen to a single word she is saying," Caroline screamed, her voice cracking with desperate hysteria. "She is completely insane. My daughter is suffering from a severe psychotic break right in front of all of you. She is dangerously unwell, and she fabricated these financial documents to maliciously punish us today." My mother swept her arms out wide, playing the role of the tragic, terrified parent with absolute theatrical perfection. "It is true," she wailed loudly, ensuring the country club president and the board members heard her tragic plea. "Richard and I had to file an emergency legal conservatorship petition just yesterday morning. We had to ask a federal judge to step in and forcefully take control of her life because she is completely losing her mind. She is a danger to herself and to this entire family. She is a deeply sick woman spinning paranoid delusions right now." A heavy murmur of confusion rippled through the grand ballroom. The wealthy guests exchanged incredibly uneasy glances. Mental illness was a highly taboo subject in these elite social circles, and the sudden mention of a court-ordered conservatorship made several people step back in visible discomfort. Savannah quickly seized the opportunity and rushed to her mother's side, nodding vigorously. "She is obsessed with me," Savannah cried, dabbing her dry eyes. "She hired hackers to create fake bank statements just to ruin my wedding. She needs to be locked in a hospital." My father Richard stood a few feet away, wiping the thick sweat from his forehead. He suddenly looked incredibly smug, believing his wife had brilliantly managed to turn the wealthy crowd against me by weaponizing the stigma of mental health. He crossed his arms and glared at me, expecting me to finally break down in panic under the heavy weight of their united public assault. I did not panic. I did not even raise my voice. I simply let them finish their pathetic, desperate performance. I held the wireless microphone up to my mouth and offered my mother a chillingly polite smile. "You are absolutely right, Caroline," I said, my voice perfectly steady and echoing through the surround sound speakers. "You did indeed file a legal conservatorship petition yesterday morning, claiming I was completely incompetent. And you hired Gregory Thorne to aggressively push it through the county courthouse." My mother lifted her chin triumphantly. "She admitted it," Caroline shouted to the crowd. I raised my hand, calling for total silence. "However," I continued smoothly, "what you do not know is that my corporate legal team intercepted your highly fraudulent filing before you even finished picking out your rented tuxedo, Richard." I tapped the screen of my digital tablet. The massive pie charts and the credit card statements instantly vanished from the wall. They were immediately replaced by a stark official legal document bearing the heavy gold seal of the county courthouse and the bold signature of a presiding judge. "Let us read this together," I announced, clearly pointing at the projected document. "This is an official judicial dismissal stamped and signed just 3 hours ago. The judge reviewed your emergency petition, reviewed the overwhelming evidence of your severe financial fraud, and threw your case out of court with extreme prejudice. He legally declared your claims to be entirely baseless, deeply malicious, and a blatant abuse of the judicial system." The smug expression instantly melted right off my father's face. Caroline gasped, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. But the projector screen had even more terrible news waiting for them. I tapped the tablet one more time, bringing up a second heavily redacted legal document right next to the judicial dismissal. And because I do not tolerate people trying to steal my absolute freedom, I added, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "My corporate law firm has officially filed a massive countersuit against both of you. You are now being sued for severe defamation, malicious prosecution, and the attempted fraudulent seizure of my private assets. I am also coming after you for every single dollar in legal fees my attorneys accumulated while dismantling your pathetic little scam today." The ballroom fell completely dead silent once again. The guests stared at the wall, absorbing the undeniable legal truth. There was no psychotic break. There was no delusion. There was only a successful woman systematically destroying the parasites who had tried to consume her. Jamal and Josephine stood watching them, completely exposed to the world. Jamal and Josephine stood watching them, completely exposed to the world. But my father Richard was a man who simply could not accept defeat. Even as the legal documents proving his massive fraud burned brightly on the wall behind him, he desperately scrambled to find one last shred of superiority to hold over my head. He puffed out his chest and pointed an aggressive finger at me, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure spite. "You think you are so smart, Olivia?" Richard yelled, his voice cracking slightly as it echoed through the massive ballroom. "You think flashing some legal paperwork makes you better than us? You are just a jealous, pathetic little girl. You are incredibly jealous because you rent a tiny, cramped apartment downtown while your mother and I live in a stunning 5-bedroom mansion in the most exclusive, gated community in this entire state. We have a heated pool and a manicured lawn, and you have absolutely nothing. You will never achieve the level of luxury and status that we have built." A few of the country club guests actually cringed at his desperate outburst. It was the frantic flailing of a drowning man trying to pull someone else under the water with him. I stood completely still, holding the wireless microphone, and allowed his arrogant words to ring out in the absolute silence of the room. I did not look angry. I actually felt a genuine wave of profound pity for the man standing before me. He had tied his entire identity to a brick structure that he did not even possess. "Are you quite finished, Richard?" I asked calmly, my voice cutting through the heavy tension like a sharp knife. "Because since you brought up your stunning 5-bedroom mansion, I think it is only fair that we show your elite friends exactly who really owns that property." I swiped my finger across the digital tablet one final time. The legal countersuit documents vanished from the massive projector screen. They were instantly replaced by a series of highly official real estate records. On the left side of the screen was a stark red foreclosure notice issued by a major national bank exactly 2 years ago. It boldly listed Richard and Caroline as the severely defaulted borrowers. On the right side of the screen was a newly minted property deed bearing the official county clerk seal. My father turned around to look at the wall, and all the aggressive bluster instantly drained from his body. His jaw fell slack. My mother Caroline let out a soft, horrifying whimper as she recognized the address of her beloved luxury home projected in massive black letters. 2 years ago, I explained, my voice steady and commanding, the bank officially foreclosed on your beautiful luxury mansion. You had defaulted on your massive second mortgage, and you were exactly 48 hours away from being physically locked out on the street by the county sheriff. Do you remember that terrifying week, Richard? Do you remember telling Caroline that a miraculous, anonymous private holding company had suddenly stepped in at the very last second, purchased your distressed debt from the bank, and graciously allowed you to remain in the house on a month-to-month lease agreement? Richard could not speak. He just stared blankly at the glowing property deed on the wall, his hands trembling uncontrollably at his sides. You spent the last 2 years bragging to everyone in this country club about your expensive home. I continued, relentlessly pacing slowly across the ballroom floor. You used that house to belittle me, to call me a failure, to make yourselves feel vastly superior to my modest lifestyle. But the truth is, you do not own a single brick of that property. You do not own the heated pool. You do not own the manicured lawn. You are nothing but month-to-month tenants living entirely on borrowed time. I stopped pacing and turned to face my completely broken parents directly. I pointed up at the name of the private holding company listed clearly at the very top of the official property deed. Onyx Capital Management. That private holding company is mine, I announced, my voice echoing with absolute finality. I bought your defaulted debt in cash. I saved you from absolute homelessness while you were busy mocking my beat-up car and my practical clothes. You are not wealthy aristocrats living in a family estate. You are my tenants. I own the house you sleep in. I own the ground you walk on. I am your landlord. The sheer magnitude of this shocking revelation hit the quiet ballroom like a massive physical shockwave, completely stunning the wealthy guests, who stood completely frozen in absolute and total disbelief. The silence in the grand ballroom was so profound that you could clearly hear the soft hum of the massive projector fan spinning above us. My father, Richard, looked like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. He stared blankly at the property deed glowing brightly on the wall. My mother, Caroline, had completely stopped her theatrical crying. She was gripping the edge of a nearby chair, her knuckles turning stark white, as the horrifying reality of her situation finally sank fully into her panicked mind. The country club guests, who had previously tolerated my parents' arrogant boasting, were now actively backing away from them. Nobody wanted to be standing too close to the epicenter of such a catastrophic social and financial explosion. I did not give them a single moment to catch their breath or formulate another pathetic lie. I reached into my sleek black designer handbag one final time. I pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents bound tightly by a heavy metal clip. I walked slowly across the polished hardwood floor, my high heels clicking loudly with every single deliberate step. I stopped directly in front of the lavish head table, where Savannah was still clutching the torn pieces of the ruined extortion contract. I raised the thick stack of papers high into the air so every single person in the room could clearly see what I was holding. Then I slammed the documents down onto the center of the table right next to Savannah's crystal champagne flute. At them. He stared at the bold red at them. He stared at the bold red lettering printed across the top page. I picked up the wireless microphone again and looked him right in the eye. That, Richard, is your official 30-day notice of eviction, I announced clearly. You see, for the last 2 years, I was perfectly content to let you live quietly in that massive house. I was perfectly content to let you play pretend with your wealthy country club friends and act like you were a wildly successful patriarch. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I paid the expensive homeowner's insurance completely out of my pocket. I even paid for the expensive landscaping service that kept your front lawn looking so pristine. I asked for absolutely nothing in return. I just wanted you to leave me alone so I could live my life in peace. My mother let out a sharp, terrified gasp. "You cannot do this to us!" Caroline cried desperately, reaching out toward the table. "Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely no money and no credit. We will be completely homeless, Olivia." I turned my gaze toward her, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for her highly manipulative and entirely fake tragic tears. "You should have thought about that before you hired Gregory Thorne," I replied coldly. You should have thought about your precarious living situation before you went to a federal courthouse and tried to legally steal my private estate. By filing that malicious conservatorship petition, you actively proved that you are fundamentally untrustworthy and deeply hostile. From a strictly corporate perspective, you instantly became a severe financial liability to Onyx Capital Management. And as the chief executive officer of that firm, I am legally obligated to liquidate toxic assets. I gestured toward the formal eviction papers sitting on the wooden table. The property goes on the open real estate market tomorrow morning? I continued, my voice echoing firmly. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your designer clothes, your rented furniture, and whatever dignity you think you have left. If you are not completely moved out of that house by the first day of next month, I will personally have the county sheriff arrive at the property to physically remove your belongings and change every single lock on the doors. Richard stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly. He reached out and grabbed the back of a nearby dining chair tightly. He stopped himself from collapsing onto the floor. But we are your family. Richard pleaded, a pathetic, desperate whine, replacing his usual arrogant tone. You cannot throw your own blood out into the street. People will think you are a total monster. I let out a short, hollow laugh. No. Richard, I corrected him smoothly, gesturing to the room full of horrified, wealthy guests. People will think I am a brilliant businesswoman who finally stopped funding a family of incredibly ungrateful parasites. You dug this massive grave with your own overwhelming greed. Now you get to sleep in it tonight. The silence that followed my final declaration was suddenly broken by a sharp, high-pitched wail. It did not come from my mother. It came from Savannah. My younger sister was standing near the front table, her face completely distorted by a mixture of profound panic and intense rage. She looked at the official eviction notice sitting next to her crystal champagne flute, and then she slowly turned to look at my parents. The beautiful, innocent facade she had carefully maintained for her social media followers completely evaporated in an instant. You lied to me, Savannah screamed, her voice cracking loudly. She stomped her expensive designer heel onto the hardwood floor, pointing a shaking finger directly at my father. You told me you had millions of dollars tied up in overseas investments, Richard. You told me this wedding was entirely paid for. You told me I was going to be the most beautiful, wealthy bride this city had ever seen. And now you are telling me you are completely bankrupt and getting evicted by my own sister. You have ruined my entire life. My mother reached out, trying to soothe her golden child. Sweetheart, please calm down. Caroline pleaded, tears streaming down her face. We were just trying to protect you. We wanted you to have the perfect day. We did everything we could to maintain your image. Do not touch me! Savannah shrieked violently, swatting my mother's hand away. You are pathetic. Both of you are completely pathetic. You are nothing but broke, embarrassing frauds. How am I supposed to maintain my internet brand now? My followers are going to find out my family is homeless. You are going to drag my perfect reputation down into the dirt with you. I cannot be associated with poor people. I will completely lose all my brand deals. My father looked absolutely devastated. The daughter he had worshipped, the golden child he had sacrificed my future and his own financial stability for, was now publicly discarding him the absolute second the money ran dry. Savannah did not care about them. She only cared about what they could buy for her. Savannah quickly turned her back on our sobbing parents and locked her desperate eyes onto Jamal. She ran across the room and grabbed both of his hands tightly. Her tears instantly stopped and a frantic, manipulative smile stretched across her face. Jamal, baby, she said, her voice suddenly dripping with a sickening artificial sweetness. We do not need them. We do not need this massive, expensive wedding or these awful people. We can just leave right now. We can elope. Jamal stared down at her, his face completely devoid of any emotion. Elope? He asked quietly. Yes. Savannah nodded vigorously, digging her manicured nails into his hands. We can fly to Las Vegas tonight or go to the courthouse tomorrow morning. You are a highly successful orthopedic surgeon, Jamal. You make an incredible salary. You can easily pay off my credit cards, and we can just start our own beautiful, wealthy life together. I will completely cut off my toxic, bankrupt parents. I will even sign a post-nuptial agreement if your mother wants me to. Just take me away from this massive embarrassment. We can live in your luxury condo, and you can fund my lifestyle brand until I get back on my feet. You promised to take care of me, Jamal. The absolute audacity of her words hung heavily in the air. Savannah had completely dropped her mask. In her frantic desperation to secure a new source of funding, she had openly admitted that she viewed Jamal as nothing more than a human bank account. She did not express any love for him. She did not express any regret for lying to his family about the engagement ring. She only saw his prestigious medical degree and his massive income potential. She was fully prepared to throw her own parents straight under the bus and latch onto him like a desperate parasite just to keep buying designer handbags. Josephine stood a few feet away, her posture perfectly straight. She did not say a single word, but her sharp eyes analyzed Savannah with the cold precision of a federal judge issuing a life sentence. She had seen right through my sister from the very beginning, and now Savannah was proving her right in front of the entire country club. Jamal slowly looked down at his hands, which were still being gripped tightly by my frantic sister. He looked at my parents, who were currently weeping near the ruined head table. Then he looked at me standing calmly by the massive projector screen. The heavy tension in the ballroom reached a terrifying boiling point as everyone waited for his final absolute and undeniable answer. Jamal slowly looked down at his hands, which were still being gripped tightly by my frantic sister. He looked at my parents, who were currently weeping near the ruined head table. Then he looked at me standing calmly by the massive projector screen. The heavy tension in the ballroom reached a terrifying boiling point as everyone waited for his final, absolute, and undeniable answer. Jamal gently but very firmly pried Savannah's manicured fingers off his hands. He took a deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from her desperate grasp. He did not look angry or enraged. He looked at her with a profound, quiet disgust that was far more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. "You want us to elope?" Jamal asked, his voice low and incredibly steady. "You want me to just ignore everything that just happened in this room, pay off your massive hidden debts, and fund your fake internet lifestyle while you completely abandon your bankrupt family?" Savannah nodded eagerly, completely missing the icy undertone in his voice. "Yes, exactly," she whispered, her eyes wide with frantic hope. "We can leave all this horrible drama behind, Jamal. We can be perfect together. I promise I will be the perfect doctor's wife." Jamal slowly shook his head. "You do not even understand what the word perfect means, Savannah," he said quietly. "You think perfection is a leased luxury car and a fake engagement ring. You think it is smiling for a camera while actively destroying the people around you." He turned away from her and walked purposefully toward the audio-visual booth where I was standing. He reached out and I handed him the wireless microphone. Jamal turned to face the entire ballroom. The wealthy guests leaned forward, completely captivated by the absolute destruction of this highly anticipated society wedding. "My family values integrity above all else," Jamal announced, his deep voice echoing through the massive room. "We value honesty, hard work, and protecting the people we love. Josephine and my father built our family name by standing up for what is right, even when it is incredibly difficult." He turned his gaze back to Savannah, who was now trembling visibly. "You have absolutely no integrity," Savannah, Jamal stated firmly. "You have no honesty. You lied to me about the ring. You lied to your followers about your wealth. And worst of all, you stood by and eagerly watched your parents try to legally destroy your own sister just so you could afford a lavish party. You are not a victim here. You are a willing participant in a highly toxic, deeply abusive system." Savannah let out a choked sob, clutching her chest. "Jamal, please," she begged, taking a weak step toward him. "Do not do this to me in front of everyone. I am not doing this to you," Jamal corrected her smoothly. "You did this to yourself. The wedding is officially canceled. There will be no ceremony tomorrow. There will be no elopement to Las Vegas. I am entirely done with this family." My mother Caroline let out another loud theatrical wail, collapsing back into her chair. Richard buried his face in his hands, completely broken and humiliated in front of his elite peers. But Jamal was not finished cleaning up the wreckage. He walked back over to Savannah and held out his right hand, palm up. Since Olivia was the one who actually paid for that 3-carat diamond ring, Jamal said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I believe it is time you return it. I am not leaving this building while you are still wearing stolen property." Savannah gasped, clutching her left hand to her chest, as if he had just asked her to cut off her own finger. "No!" she whined, her face twisting into a petulant scowl. "It is mine. It was a gift. You cannot take it back." "It was a gift based entirely on a massive fraudulent lie," Jamal countered, stepping closer. "Take it off, Savannah. Do not make me ask the country club security to forcefully remove it from your hand." The mention of the security guards finally broke her. Savannah looked around the room and saw the absolute contempt in the eyes of the wealthy guests. She saw Josephine standing tall and unbothered, ready to deploy a team of elite lawyers if necessary. With a trembling hand and fresh tears streaming down her contoured face, Savannah slowly slid the massive diamond ring off her finger. She dropped it into Jamal's outstretched palm with a soft metallic clink. Jamal closed his fist around the ring and turned toward his parents. "Josephine, my father," he said clearly, "we are leaving. Please gather the rest of our family members and head to the exits. There is absolutely nothing left for us to celebrate here tonight." Josephine offered a crisp, satisfied nod. She turned and began gracefully ushering the extended family members out of the grand ballroom, leaving the toxic wreckage of my family entirely behind them. Josephine offered a crisp, satisfied nod. She turned and began gracefully ushering the extended family members out of the grand ballroom, leaving the toxic wreckage of my family entirely behind them. But Richard could not let it end this way. Watching his prestigious future-in-laws walk out was the final blow to his fragile ego. He snapped. His face contorted into an unrecognizable mask of pure fury, and he turned his burning eyes directly toward me. "You did this!" he roared, his voice echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. "You deliberately planned this entire spectacle to destroy us." He lunged forward, closing the distance between us in heavy stomping strides. His hands were curled into tight fists, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he was going to strike me right there in the middle of the room. Before he could come within arm's reach of me, a solid wall of tailored suits materialized out of nowhere, blocking his path completely. Jamal had not left the room with his mother. He stayed behind, anticipating my father's violent reaction, and several of his tall, athletic cousins stayed right beside him. They stepped seamlessly in front of me, creating a highly impenetrable physical barrier between my calm stance and my father's explosive rage. Jamal stood dead center, looking down at Richard with eyes as cold as ice. "Take one more step toward her, Richard," Jamal warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Just take one single step, and I will ensure you leave this country club in the back of a police cruiser before you even have a chance to pack your bags for the eviction." My father froze instantly, intimidated by the sheer physical presence of the men standing firmly before him. He was a coward who only knew how to bully women and children behind closed doors. Faced with actual strength, his aggressive posture completely crumbled. He took a shaky step backward, his chest heaving with heavy, defeated breaths. Seeing her husband utterly humiliated and entirely neutralized my mother, Caroline decided to deploy her absolute final weapon. She let out a loud, ear-piercing shriek and dramatically threw herself onto the polished hardwood floor. She collapsed in a heap of expensive designer fabric, clutching her chest and gasping loudly for air as if she were suffering a sudden, massive heart attack. "Please, somebody help me," she wailed, thrashing her arms wildly. "My heart is failing. The stress is killing me. Call an ambulance immediately." It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera, but the reaction from the room was completely unprecedented. In the past, her dramatic displays of victimhood would always send our family scrambling to comfort her and apologize. But tonight, under the harsh, bright light of the projector screen exposing her massive financial frauds, the wealthy country club guests saw right through her pathetic charade. Nobody rushed to her side. The waiters continued quietly clearing the tables. The country club president simply turned his back and walked toward the mahogany bar, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Savannah stood frozen near the head table, entirely paralyzed by the sheer embarrassment of watching her mother thrash around on the floor like a petulant toddler. I stood safely behind Jamal's cousins and looked down at my mother. I felt no panic. I felt no guilt. I felt absolutely nothing at all. I calmly reached over to the audio-visual soundboard, unplugged my digital tablet, and slipped it securely back into my sleek black designer handbag. I took one final look round the grand ballroom, taking in the absolute destruction of their fake, carefully constructed world. It was a beautiful, satisfying ruin. "Thank you, Jamal," I said quietly, touching his shoulder. He turned and offered me a small, genuine smile of profound mutual respect. "You do not ever have to deal with them again, Olivia," he replied softly. "Let us get you out of here." The wall of men parted slightly, allowing me to step forward. I did not look back at my father, who was staring blankly at the floor. I did not look back at Savannah, who was crying over her lost lifestyle. I did not look back at my mother, who was still aggressively faking a medical emergency to an entirely empty, unbothered audience. I walked confidently out of the grand ballroom, my high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the country club and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. The valet brought my beat-up Toyota Prius to the front entrance, and I slid into the driver's seat, feeling a massive, suffocating weight finally lift off my shoulders. I was entirely free to live my beautiful life without them holding me. I drove back to my peaceful penthouse overlooking the city, feeling a profound sense of quiet closure. I slept soundly for the first time in years. But while I was resting comfortably in my own massive bed, the sheer magnitude of the disaster I had orchestrated was actively rippling through my family's entire social network. The fallout was swift, completely brutal, and entirely public. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the country club gossip network had shifted into maximum overdrive. Every single wealthy guest who had attended the disastrous rehearsal dinner had immediately called their friends who had then called their friends. The story of my parents' massive financial fraud, their fake luxury mansion, and the dramatic cancellation of Savannah's wedding spread through the elite suburban community faster than a raging wildfire. I woke up, poured myself a cup of fresh espresso, and opened my laptop to check my email. The first message I saw was a highly formal notification from the Oak Creek Country Club Board of Directors. They had sent a mass email to all members officially announcing the immediate termination of Richard and Caroline's Platinum membership due to, quote, severe breaches of conduct and overwhelming financial insolvency, end quote. My parents had been formally banished from the only social circle they ever truly cared about. But the country club banishment was just the beginning of their nightmare. Because Savannah's wedding was supposed to take place that exact afternoon, the high-end vendors had naturally expected their final massive payments by midnight. When my father's empty bank accounts failed to wire the necessary $200,000, the vendors immediately pulled the plug. The luxury floral company sent a team of workers to the venue to aggressively repossess every single imported white rose. The five-star catering company canceled the entire menu and threatened to sue my father for breach of contract. Savannah woke up on what was supposed to be the most magical day of her life to find out that she did not even have a wedding cake. But the loss of her extravagant party was nothing compared to the absolute destruction of her internet brand. While my family was scrambling to handle the aggressive vendors, one of the younger country club guests had anonymously leaked a highly detailed account of the rehearsal dinner drama to a popular local gossip blog. The blog post went viral instantly. It detailed exactly how Savannah had lied about purchasing her own 3-carat engagement ring, how she had tried to elope with her wealthy fiancé purely for his salary, and how her entire family was getting violently evicted by her older sister. I casually opened a new browser tab and navigated to Savannah's social media page. It was an absolute digital bloodbath. Savannah had desperately posted a photo of her expensive wedding dress earlier that morning, trying to maintain the illusion that the wedding was still happening. But her 50,000 followers had already seen the viral gossip blog post, and they were not holding back. The comments section was flooded with thousands of angry messages completely dragging her for her massive hypocrisy and toxic behavior. Her followers called her a cheap fraud, a desperate gold digger, and a pathetic liar. People were demanding that she take down her previous video, where she had falsely accused me of ruining her life. Several prominent lifestyle brands that previously sponsored her content publicly announced they were immediately terminating their lucrative partnership contracts with her due to her toxic behavior. Her entire carefully curated digital empire was burning to the ground in real time. My cell phone buzzed loudly on the kitchen counter, breaking my focus on the screen. It was Thomas, my lead corporate attorney, calling to give me an update on the legal proceedings. "Good morning, Olivia," Thomas said, his voice practically humming with deep professional satisfaction. "I just received a frantic call from Gregory Thorne. He formally withdrew as your parents' legal counsel this morning. He realized they were completely broke and could not pay his massive hourly rate, so he immediately abandoned them." Thomas chuckled softly. The process server also successfully delivered the official 30-day eviction notice to their front door an hour ago. And our massive countersuit for defamation and fraudulent prosecution is officially moving forward in the county courthouse. They are entirely ruined, Olivia. They have absolutely no money, no lawyer, and no social standing left. I took a slow sip of my hot espresso, looking out over the beautiful, sprawling city skyline. "Excellent work, Thomas," I replied smoothly. "Let them panic. Let them face the very real consequences of their own overwhelming greed." I hung up the phone and closed my laptop, feeling completely unbothered by the sheer chaos consuming my family's life. They had built their entire existence on a foundation of cruel lies, and I had simply provided the small necessary spark to burn it all down. Now they had exactly 30 days to pack up their fake life and completely disappear from mine forever. Exactly 30 days later, I found myself sitting quietly in the driver's seat of my reliable Toyota Prius. I was parked safely down the street from the luxury mansion that my parents used to call their own. The morning air was crisp, and the neighborhood was perfectly quiet. But the scene unfolding at the end of the manicured driveway was anything but peaceful. Today was the final day of their eviction notice, and I wanted to witness the absolute conclusion of the massive lie they had forced me to live under for my entire adult life. I rolled my window down just a crack and watched as a heavy industrial tow truck backed slowly into the driveway. The loud beeping echoed through the quiet street, signaling the arrival of the repo men. The target was Savannah's bright red luxury Porsche Macan. The car she had used to build her fake online persona was now completely covered in dust. The lease had not been paid in 4 months, and the dealership was taking their property back. Savannah burst out of the heavy mahogany front doors, wearing a pair of faded sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. She looked absolutely nothing like the glamorous internet lifestyle vlogger she had pretended to be just 1 month ago. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, and her face was puffy from weeks of constant crying. She ran down the driveway, waving her arms frantically at the tow truck driver. I could faintly hear her begging him to give her just 1 more week, claiming she was expecting a massive brand sponsorship check that would cover all the missed payments. But the tow truck driver was a professional who had dealt with thousands of desperate people living far beyond their means. He completely ignored her theatrical pleas. He calmly stepped out of his truck, hooked the heavy steel chains to the undercarriage of the Porsche, and engaged the hydraulic winch. Savannah dropped to her knees right there on the pristine concrete driveway, watching in absolute horror as her ultimate status symbol was slowly dragged onto the flatbed truck. She did not even bother pulling out her phone to record a dramatic video for her followers, because she had no followers left to manipulate. As the tow truck pulled away carrying the red Porsche down the street, a battered, rented moving box truck backed into the exact same spot. Two exhausted-looking movers stepped out and began hauling my parents' belongings out of the grand mansion. This was not a high-end white-glove moving service, because their bank accounts were completely frozen and their credit cards were entirely maxed out. My father had been forced to hire the absolute cheapest labor he could find. I watched as the movers carried out their oversized, gaudy furniture. Under the harsh morning sunlight, the furniture looked incredibly cheap and badly worn. The velvet couches were stained and the gold-painted accents were visibly peeling. Without the dim romantic lighting of the country club or the careful staging of a luxury home, their possessions looked exactly like what they were. They were cheap, fragile imitations of real wealth. My father, Richard, finally emerged from the house carrying a cardboard box filled with old paperwork. His shoulders were slumped heavily, and he dragged his feet across the concrete. The arrogant, patriarchal posture he had maintained for decades was completely gone. He looked incredibly old and profoundly defeated. My mother, Caroline, followed closely behind him, carrying a plastic garbage bag full of her designer clothes. She was not crying or putting on a massive, dramatic performance for the neighbors. There was absolutely no one left for her to perform for. The elite neighbors they had tried so desperately to impress were all safely hidden behind their drawn curtains, completely ignoring the embarrassing spectacle outside. I knew exactly where that battered moving truck was heading later this afternoon. Thomas, my corporate attorney, had kept me fully updated on their desperate housing search. Because of their ruined credit scores and massive outstanding legal debts, no reputable landlord in the affluent suburbs would approve their rental applications. They were moving into a highly cramped two-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized neighborhood on the complete opposite side of the city. Savannah would have to share a tiny bathroom with her parents, and Richard would have to park his heavily financed sedan on a crowded public street. They were finally stepping into the exact harsh reality they had created for themselves. I watched them load the last of their cheap cardboard boxes into the back of the rented truck. I did not feel any lingering anger or deep sadness about their current situation. I simply felt a profound and overwhelming sense of quiet peace. I started the engine of my car and drove away without looking in my rearview mirror. Over the next 2 weeks, my life settled into a beautiful, uninterrupted rhythm. I spent my days closing highly profitable real estate deals, and my evenings enjoying the quiet luxury of my penthouse. There were no more frantic phone calls demanding that I pay off Savannah's credit card bills. There were no more toxic family dinners, where I was forced to sit in silence while my parents mocked my career. I was finally completely free to exist on my own terms without their suffocating presence. I knew my father well enough to know a desperate man will always try one last pathetic manipulation. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I sat at my black marble desk. My private cell phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed my father's phone number. I had not blocked him yet because my attorneys advised me to keep communication lines open until our defamation lawsuit was fully settled. That legal battle finalized earlier that morning with my parents officially surrendering because they could not afford to fight anymore. I decided to answer just to hear his final attempt. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear without saying a single greeting. "Olivia," my father said, his voice cracking and trembling in a way I had never ever heard before. He sounded completely broken, entirely stripped of the arrogant, booming authority he used to command so easily. "Olivia, please do not hang up the phone. I am begging you to just listen to me for 1 minute." I leaned back in my leather office chair, remaining perfectly silent and completely unbothered. "We are really struggling out here, Olivia." My father continued, his voice thick with desperate self-pity. This new apartment is terrible. The heating barely works and the neighborhood is incredibly loud at night. Your mother cries herself to sleep every day because she misses her garden. Savannah is devastated. She cannot find a job that pays enough to cover her living expenses because her internet reputation is ruined forever. We have lost absolutely everything we cared about. All of our wealthy friends from the country club have abandoned us. He paused, clearly waiting for me to express warm sympathy. When I offered nothing but cold silence, he quickly shifted his strategy back to his familiar manipulative tactics. "I know we made some terrible mistakes, Olivia," he pleaded softly, his tone oozing fake regret. "I know I was completely wrong to file that conservatorship petition against you. I was desperate and panicked about losing our social standing. But you have proven your point beautifully. You completely destroyed us. You won the war. But we are still family. We share the same blood. You cannot leave us rotting in this awful place." He took a deep, ragged breath before finally delivering the real reason for his pathetic phone call. "I am just asking for a little bit of grace," my father whined. "I am asking for your forgiveness. And I was hoping that maybe, since you are doing so incredibly well for yourself, you could find it in your heart to give us a small loan. Just a temporary injection of cash to help us get back on our feet. $50,000 would change our current miserable situation. We would pay you back with interest, I promise. Just a small handout to save your parents from ruin." I listened to his pathetic speech feeling absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. He had not learned a single lesson. Even after being publicly exposed and legally dismantled, he viewed me as nothing more than an endless human bank account. He thought he could just cry and manipulate his way back into my finances. I sat forward and placed my elbows on the marble desk. "Richard," I said, my voice dripping with icy professionalism, "do you remember what you said to me at that restaurant just a few weeks ago? You loudly announced to Jamal's entire family that you had to cut me off because I needed to learn independence. You told everyone there that I could not live off handouts from my parents forever." My father let out a quiet, desperate whimper on the other end of the line. "Well, I took your advice to heart," I told him, my tone devoid of any emotion. "I stopped living off handouts, Dad. You should try it." Before he could utter another pathetic excuse, I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call instantly. I opened my contacts list, tapped his name, and selected the option to permanently block his number. I did the exact same thing for Caroline and Savannah. The cord was finally cut forever. The cord was finally cut forever. The months that followed that final phone call were the most peaceful of my entire life. Summer slowly faded into autumn, and late November quickly arrived, bringing the familiar holiday chill. In the past, Thanksgiving was a holiday I actively dreaded. It meant sitting at a highly tense table listening to my mother brag about Savannah's fake accomplishments while actively ignoring my very existence. But this year was going to be completely different. I was not spending the holiday alone in my penthouse. Instead, I was pulling my car into the long, sweeping driveway of a stunning brick estate in an affluent Atlanta suburb. I parked and walked up the wide stone steps holding a freshly baked pecan pie and a bottle of vintage wine. The front door swung open before I could even ring the bell. Josephine stood there, wearing a beautiful crimson dress, with a warm, genuine smile lighting up her face. "Welcome home, Olivia," she said warmly, pulling me into a deep, comforting hug. It was the kind of maternal embrace I had never received from my own mother. I stepped inside the massive foyer and was immediately hit by the incredible aromas of a traditional Southern holiday feast. The smell of roasted turkey, baked macaroni, collard greens, and sweet potato casserole drifted through the warm air. The house was alive with loud, joyous laughter and the comforting sounds of genuine connection. Dozens of family members were gathered in the spacious living room, swapping stories and watching football. There was absolutely no tension, no performative wealth, and no toxic undercurrent of jealousy. It was just a group of successful, loving people choosing to celebrate life together. Jamal walked out of the kitchen, wearing a casual sweater and carrying a tray of appetizers. When he saw me, He set the tray down and walked over, giving me a firm, friendly hug. "It is incredibly good to see you, Olivia," Jamal said, handing me a glass of sparkling cider. "How is the real estate empire running these days?" I smiled, taking the glass. "The empire is expanding beautifully," I replied. "And how is the hospital?" Jamal laughed, shaking his head. "Busy, but I finally got approved for that new pediatric orthopedic program I was pitching." He looked genuinely happy and entirely stress-free. In the months since the rehearsal dinner disaster, Jamal and I had developed a profound platonic friendship. There was absolutely no forced romance between us. We were simply two highly driven professionals who had survived a massive collision with a toxic family and emerged stronger on the other side. We shared a mutual respect that was completely unbreakable. Josephine ushered everyone into the grand dining room. The table was absolutely massive, stretching across the room, heavily laden with incredible food. I found my seat situated right between Jamal and his favorite aunt. As everyone settled down, the room grew quiet, and Jamal's father stood at the head of the table to deliver the traditional Thanksgiving blessing. He spoke beautifully about gratitude, resilience, and the profound importance of chosen family. I closed my eyes and listened to his deep, resonant voice, feeling a strange prickle of tears behind my eyelids. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of absolute relief. When the blessing ended, the table erupted back into joyous conversation. Bowls of food were passed around, and the room was filled with the sound of clinking silverware. Josephine leaned over and gently touched my arm. "I am so glad you decided to join us today, Olivia," she said, her dark eyes full of profound understanding. "You belong at a table where your presence is genuinely celebrated, not merely tolerated." I looked at her and then looked around the massive room. I saw uncles laughing loudly with their nephews' cousins, sharing inside jokes, and Jamal actively engaged in a passionate debate about sports with his brother. For 33 years, I had believed that family was a mandatory life sentence. I thought I had to endure the constant disrespect, the emotional manipulation, and the severe financial abuse simply because we shared the same bloodline. I thought the empty ache in my chest was a normal part of existence. Sitting at this beautiful table surrounded by warmth and unconditional acceptance, I realized the absolute truth. A real family does not view you as a financial asset or a scapegoat. A real family actively protects your peace. They celebrate your victories and stand beside you when the world tries to tear you down. I took a bite of the food, feeling completely full in more ways than one. I was no longer the lonely scapegoat hiding in the shadows of a fake luxury mansion. I had found my real home. Later that evening, I drove back to my penthouse under a clear, starry sky. The contrast between my past and my present was impossible to ignore. For my entire life, my parents had aggressively weaponized the concept of family to keep me compliant. Society constantly tells us that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to forgive and forget, to keep the peace, and to honor our parents no matter how deeply they hurt us. But I am here to tell you that blood is nothing more than basic biology. Sharing genetic material does not grant anyone a lifetime pass to emotionally and financially abuse you. It does not give them the absolute right to treat you like a disposable human bank account or a punching bag for their own deep-seated insecurities. Walking away from toxic family members is often viewed as a radical or deeply selfish act, especially for women. We are heavily conditioned to be the designated peacekeepers, the ones who silently absorb the damage to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy home. But choosing to cut the cord is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of radical self-respect. When you finally stop pouring your precious energy into a bottomless pit of ungrateful people, you suddenly realize how much power you actually possess. You realize that the heavy burden you were carrying was never yours to bear in the first place. You are entirely allowed to set firm boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. I occasionally hear brief updates about my parents in Savannah through the neighborhood grapevine. They are still living in that cramped two-bedroom apartment in the industrial district. My father works a low-level sales job that barely covers their monthly rent. My mother spends her days bitterly complaining to anyone who will listen about how cruelly they were treated by their own ungrateful daughter. Savannah is currently working as a front desk receptionist at a local public gym, completely stripped of her glamorous internet persona. They spend their remaining time blaming me, blaming the economy, and blaming everyone else for their massive downfall. They have not changed, and they never truly will. But the most beautiful part of my reality is that their daily misery no longer affects me. They are just distant ghosts, fading entirely into the background of my vibrant life. People often ask me if the massive public confrontation at the country club was the greatest revenge I could have ever orchestrated. It was certainly satisfying to watch their house of cards completely collapse under the heavy weight of the undeniable truth. But the projector screen and the legal eviction notice were just the necessary tools to clear the toxic debris out of my path. The greatest revenge is not simply about destroying your abusers. It is about what you choose to build in the empty, peaceful space they leave behind. The greatest revenge is waking up on a quiet Tuesday morning, pouring a cup of hot espresso, and realizing that you feel entirely safe in your own home. It is looking at your bank accounts and knowing that your hard work belongs exclusively to you. It is building an untouchable, beautiful life that they will never be allowed to access or destroy ever again. The next morning, I walked into my corner office at Onyx Capital Management. I stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The bright morning sun reflected perfectly off the glass skyscrapers, and the city below was buzzing with endless possibility. I placed my hand against the cool glass and took a long, deep breath. The heavy iron chains of my painful past were completely shattered. My private financial empire was entirely secure. My chosen family was genuine and deeply supportive. I was completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to walk away from highly toxic people to violently protect your own mental peace, I want you to know that you are incredibly brave. It takes immense strength to choose your own well-being over the heavy guilt trips imposed by traditional societal expectations. Please share your own personal experiences in the comments section below, because your unique story might be the exact inspiration someone else desperately needs to finally break free. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of personal triumph. Always remember that your true worth is never defined by those who completely failed to value you. Keep building your own beautiful, untouchable life and never ever look back at them. You absolutely deserve to experience massive, endless peace and joy. The story of Olivia teaches us a profound and often difficult truth. Blood relations do not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your life. For far too long, society has pushed the narrative that family must be tolerated no matter how deeply they hurt or exploit you. Olivia's journey shatters this dangerous illusion completely. Her toxic parents and sister viewed her not as a human being, but as a convenient financial safety net to catch them when their own lies and reckless spending finally caught up with them. They weaponized guilt, social status, and even the legal system to try and steal her hard-earned success. The ultimate lesson here is the absolute power of financial and emotional independence. Olivia did not just cry or argue when faced with severe betrayal. She used her meticulous preparation, her self-made wealth, and her unshakable composure to systematically dismantle their manipulation. Her ability to walk away and literally evict the toxicity from her life was only possible because she had quietly built her own untouchable fortress. She realized that the greatest revenge against narcissistic abusers is not engaging in bitter, screaming matches, but thriving in a reality they can no longer touch or control. She replaced the broken family she was born into with a chosen family built on mutual respect, integrity, and genuine love. We must learn to stop setting ourselves on fire just to keep toxic people warm. True family protects you, celebrates your victories, and does not plot against you behind your back. Your worth is never defined by the people who failed to appreciate you. Take a moment today to evaluate the boundaries in your own life and find the courage to cut ties with anyone who disrespects your peace.